All right. So, John, it's great to have you here. Today, I think you are in Paris. Is that correct?
Yeah, I'm back in Paris today. I was in Melbourne for the World Chambers Congress, which I think was a huge success actually. And then I was in New Delhi on the way back for meetings with the government there and with business. And then tomorrow I leave for London, then New York for the General Assembly, and then a few other trips. But I see we've got a very international crowd, Masami, so it's great to be with you. And thanks for reaching out when you did. I think I thank Paul Polman, who I know well, for encouraging us to talk. So happy to engage with you.
Thank you so much, John. And it's such an honor to have you in this conversation, talking about some of the biggest topic now, but also the biggest opportunity in the world right now, which is how, small to medium-sized businesses or businesses as a whole can come in to create a better future for all. But before we get into the topic, I'm really curious and interested in you as a person. So I'd like to start this conversation by asking a little bit of a personal question, if you are okay.
Yeah, sure.
John, you are serving in one of the most, let's say, powerful leadership role, being the Secretary General of International Chamber of Commerce, which connects with more than 45 million businesses around the world. So, what is the personal journey that took you to that kind of position of leadership?
Oh, a moment of self-reflection. Oh, very interesting. Well, I suppose. Look, I'll be very frank. I'm what's called a Jesuit boy. I was trained by the Jesuits, and the Jesuits instill in you at a very early age the idea of what's called man for others. It's actually what you do is actually not for yourself, but it's for others. And what that translated for me in my professional life was actually always trying to stand for something above the day to day and actually create value for others wherever I can. And I've been lucky that I've been given the opportunity, or sometimes seized the opportunity, to shape organizations that I work with to stand for more than the day to day, to actually have a real purpose, and ultimately deliver impact through that. So my journey is really the thread that combines everything is around this man for others principle. And then this whole idea of creating value for others in the world. And obviously, from my perspective, you kind of end up with a bully pulpit, or you end up in a position, and the issue is what do you do with it? There's not much point in sitting on it or sitting in the spot you are. So, what can you do to push that organization further forward? What can you do to create more value? The ICC is actually interesting. I was supposed to be the chair, and actually, I was unable because the person who was the Secretary General left early, and they asked me if I'd become the Secretary General. And in fact, Paul Polman took on the role of chair, and I took on the role of Secretary General. And so when I did that, I had a look at the organization afresh, and I thought, for where we're going and the level of challenge we have, if I can work with my team to reshape the organization, we might be able to do something quite useful. And that's really what's driven me here. What's really driven me here was the sense of opportunity and maybe the obligation that we then had at the ICC to actually use the network, use the authority, use the pulpits, create new space to actually lead differently and be available, which is where we are right now as the world moved into more uncertain times, to use the power of the institution to actually create, I think, some of the certainty that's required by business, but also create some of the openings. Our purpose is to enable business worldwide to secure peace, prosperity, and opportunity for all. I devised that purpose when I took on the role of Secretary General because I saw that as one of the great kind of opportunities we have as an enabler of business, but in the service of something more than the interests of individual businesses in the interests of the broader world.
Wow. I didn't know about the relationship with Paul Foreman and you and
Well,
yeah.
yes, it's guys on a podcast.
And when you first took that role, did you actually anticipate that you will be serving in this role for a really long time.
No, in fact, when I spoke to my family about taking on the role, I actually imagined really only being with the organization for a couple of years to sort of reorganize and reboot, then do something else. But things happen. I mean, COVID happened, and suddenly there was an obligation because of the huge problems that were caused around the global world, particularly in developing and emerging economies, for businesses to actually keep operating and actually enabling them to support their families and their communities, that it seemed always the wrong thing to do not to continue on. And we did a lot of work in COVID on things like vaccine equity, about rebooting supply chains, about enabling mobility. And then the Russian invasion of Ukraine happened, and that caused a whole bunch of other problems in terms of the challenges we had to food security, energy security, increase in debt. All these things are unintended. And now we're actually in another great disruption, which is really around an upending of the global order as we knew it, and I suppose, the revelation of a new paradigm that we'll be operating in. And so it just all seemed like, well, the kind of leadership I have was seen as useful to the organization. And what we needed to do was constantly retool the organization, reboot the organization, ensure it's relevant, create new value. And actually, we've actually grown. We're now in 170 countries, 70% in the global south.
Wow.
So we're and this is important, we're the most inclusive business voice in the world. And the reason that is important, Masami, is that you think about some of the problems you want to talk about, some of these problems like climate change. How can you solve that problem without the private sector in the room? How can you solve some of these problems now about the shift in the development paradigm without the private sector? What is the voice of the private sector? And the only really legitimate, and I think, voice of integrity is the inclusive voice of the ICC. So we have reshaped this organization to fulfill that role, and that's what we're trying to do right now.
Wow. And John, we returned from the World Chambers Congress, which was just a couple of weeks ago. And it was this year, it was held in Melbourne. And I believe Melbourne is actually your homeland.
Well,
And
actually, to be precise, I'm from Sydney, but I actually live in Melbourne. I wouldn't go between. No, I don't only say that because the Australians on the line know that Sydney-Melbourne rivalry is famous. And even though I moved to Melbourne many, many years ago, I'm still dismissed in Melbourne as flashy and superficial because I come from Sydney.
Yeah, it's good to know. And but when we are in Australia, and you came from Australia, and Australia is in a global map a little bit further down compared to majority of the land where most people live. But you coming from there, and now you are serving in the one of the most prestigious honorable leadership role at ICC. What do you see in the opportunity that we have in today's world? There is so much connectivity and the collaboration seemingly happening, but at the same time, there is a huge issues like huge income gap around the world, and still poverty being existing in many parts of the world. What do you see as the kind of like perhaps the opportunities in this world?
Well, it's a very interesting question. A couple of things, by the way. It's kind of unusual in a way for an Australian to operate in this role. Though curiously, right now in Paris, there's me running the world's largest business organization, and there's Matthias Cormann, who's running the OECD. We're very different organizations, but it's actually interesting. There are two Australians in these roles at quite an important time. One of the characteristics, if I can be so bold, of Australians is that we actually operate very well in multilateral fora because we don't bring a lot of baggage, partly because of the history, but also culturally, we're not what's called a kiss up, kick down culture. So we actually, I think, can operate in a very honest and a transparent way in organizations without baggage, which means in a way that there's less resistance sometimes to us because we don't. There's the opportunity for people to trust us if we live up to our what we say. So it's interesting. I just got to make that observation. You make a very good point that we're, in a way, never been more connected, but we're probably never at a greater risk of fragmentation than right now. And right now, with the erosion of a lot of the principles that guided us since the Second World War, what's happening is that the issues you're talking about, inequality, etc., are at risk of exacerbating. And of course, for us, the world's most inclusive organization with 70% of its kind of constituency in the global south, issues like how you enable the private sector to function, how you actually enable the economies in which the private sector operates in developing, least developed, fragile economies is actually really important to us. We're also at the same time very concerned to ensure that the constituents we have in the advanced economies continue to prosper, continue to find opportunity. So our job at the moment is to weave our way and actually try to create some order in this very disorderly model that's the paradigm that's emerging. Interestingly, I'll say this: we are 170 countries. We are actually a functioning multilateral platform. So I can have ICC India sitting at the same table as ICC Pakistan. I can say I have ICC Israel sitting at the same table as ICC Syria. I can have ICC USA sitting at the same table as ICC China, because we are all united in our common purpose, which is enabling business. Now, I'm not dismissing the political dimensions that operate around us, but we focus on what we are good at, which is delivering on our purpose, and that's through creating economic opportunity. That's what we're focusing on. And there is a lot of unity in the world around the desire for economic opportunity for all. The issue is, how do you deliver it in this time in which we're operating now?
When we were at the Congress, we actually experienced that in real life. So it's not just
Well, you
logic,
see,
right?
there are 100 countries there. Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, and so first of all, we saw the leader from the chambers in Ukraine talking about this economic opportunity. Even though Ukraine is under war, however, what they want is actually the opportunities to come to Ukraine, and that this kind of conversation is very profound. And also, one thing that I wanted to highlight as a really unique experience, but when we were talking about some of the impacts being created through the Congress, and I was invited to share a little bit about the kind of like power of micro impact. So when I started to talk about the fact that the millions of people and women and children still carry this bucket of water on their head and work hours, then what happened was among the audience, there was this lovely lady from Nigeria who stood up and said, I used to carry the water on my head.
Yeah. So on one level, I mean, obviously we have an advocacy role, which is, how do we create the frameworks to enable business to operate? And some people on the line might be interested to know we have a seat, as an observer seat at the United Nations. We're the prime interlocutor in groups like the WTO elsewhere. But interestingly, we're also a key interlocutor for the G7, the G20, and for BRICS Plus. So we can actually bring the voice, I think, around economic opportunity to all those things and what needs to happen with a lot of consistency. But we bring that based on real life experience. So, I mean, I've been to Kiev 4 times since the war started. The big issue for Ukraine, not putting aside the war, but in the context of the war, is how do we help them keep economic activity? How do we help keep the economic front operating? We've actually kept all the chambers of business, which is kind of the key artery of the private sector, functioning in Ukraine since the beginning of the war, and will continue. The issue now we're confronting is, how do we create, I think, the space for Ukraine to recalibrate its economic pathways, because clearly it was much more linked into Russia economically. It's a bit like in North America, the intertwining of Canada with the US. It's very hard to untangle that. It's very hard for Ukraine to untangle its economic architecture. What we're trying to do is help them shift and find new market access into Europe and into economies and regions they've never been before: Latin America, Africa, Asia. And that's why it was so important they're able to participate in the chamber, in the Congress. But even with Nigeria, it's interesting. We have a public good we've created over the last few years since I've been running the show, called the ICC Centre of Entrepreneurship. We have 16. We have a very important one in Lagos. When we founded the one in Lagos, we did it not top down. We actually had an open discussion like this with hundreds and hundreds of SMEs and sole proprietors asking about what issues they want us to help solve. And we had the classic woman who would be carrying her agricultural products on her back or in a cart, trying to cross through Nigeria to get to a market. And what were the non-tariff barriers? One was fear of being raped. Second was the reality that bribes were required. The third was around inconsistent government policy. And so they asked us to think about these sorts of issues. So safety, anti-corruption, and consistency. These are all elements that we focus on in Nigeria, and not just in Nigeria. So our kind of advocacy is informed by the kind of real life experiences that you saw portrayed at the Congress.
Yeah, you can just see how opportunities are the keys to uplifting the people. And when they, when we are able to uplift every person to become leaders, they themselves have enormous power to solve their own challenges. So I really experienced that firsthand, the important work that the ICC creates.
That's something, I operate with a principle that we're all agents of our own futures. We're all complicit in our own fortunes. We actually have ownership here, and we have agency. What we're trying to do all the time, particularly through centers of entrepreneurship and other interventions we have in developing and emerging economies, is give people the capacity and the networks. And they're often the things that are missing. When I mentor people, what I discover often is that what they're missing is not talent, it's connectivity, because they come from regional Australia, they don't know anyone, or they didn't go to private schools. So my job then is to be a bridge for them, to give them connectivity. In a way, we do the same thing in creating these networks. We now have the largest entrepreneurial network in the world, which is through our centers of entrepreneurship, and we join people up. So we have businesses and entrepreneurs cooperating from Buenos Aires.
And often, like, even though we understand both issues and opportunities in the world, perhaps at the individual level or individual business level, it's very easy to be overwhelmed by the amount and size of challenges. And also every business is focused on their own prosperity and also survival at times as well. Do you have something to say to the business owners and leaders thinking about playing a part in creating better world but don't know what they can do?
Look where we are at the moment with the chopping and changing around tariff rules. For most small businesses, it's just sort of like just noise. I mean, how do you make sense in that noise? What I say to people in that environment, I've been in Kenya recently. We had a very big regional conference there and spent a lot of time with small businesses there and with large businesses as well. I mean, ultimately, keep focused on your customers. I mean, keep focused on your clients. And in a way, you're not being asked to solve the problem. What we're trying to do is create an environment where we can provide you with more certainty, which you can operate. But you can't, I think, and you don't have the resources to have a war room, which a lot of large businesses have, dealing with tariff changes. You don't actually have the capacity to hire bunches of lawyers and advisors to work you through. Focus on your clients, focus on your business. We are very focused on the issue that matters most to you, which is relieving as much uncertainty as possible and creating as much order. So be assured we have your back.
And is there any thought, whether it is from your position of leadership or a personal thought, which is really about redefining success of business?
Oh, well, ultimately, we talk about enabling peace, prosperity, and opportunity for all. I mean, the power of business is the opportunity that it creates for individuals in terms of, I suppose, the sense of self, but also their ability to support their families. And obviously, the families then and their role in community. That kind of linkage is much truer than people actually talk about. People think it's only ever about the P&L. Yeah, of course, you've got to have a strong bottom line in order to do the things you want to do. But fundamentally, you actually want to create prosperity, not just for yourself. There are others who will share in that. And there's different ways of talking about it. People use the term shared capital. I mean, was it stakeholder capital? There's lots of different terms that are used, but fundamentally, it's creating prosperity for yourself, your families, and your communities. That's what drives most businesses. They really care when business leaves small towns. They really care. They're really proud of the fact that they can employ people. You know, never forget that.
Amazing. And the people on this call are all saying that they are learning so much that they didn't know
Well,
about
look,
the work that ICC
but
does.
let me tell you, I make a lot of mistakes along the way, as my team will tell you. And sometimes I'm just overly ambitious for the organization, but then I actually think you've got to keep pushing organizations, pushing them, because the greatest threat, I think, to opportunity is actually inertia. And you see that. I mean, right now, you see so many institutions globally who are just stuck. And in a sense, they're still operating in a bubble, trying to ignore the fact that the paradigm is shifting around them. One thing's for sure is the ICC will never be riven by inertia. We may be pushy, and I may be, I suppose, overly ambitious for the organization, but we are not stuck.
Amazing. And at B1G1, the business giving movement, we had this enormous pleasure to work with your fantastic team to bring impacts into this year's Congress activities as well. So as a result of having the impact integrated in the Congress, first of all, more than 1,200 trees are planted in forests and communities around the world. But not only that, in the Congress app, your team managed to put in this button saying impact. So when you go in the app, delegates can press the button and then pick the impact. And we had a variety of projects featured in there. So we actually did something like this to bring to people's awareness that making a difference can start from small actions first. And then as we get going, we can do more and more in these things. So do you have any perspective on like almost the power of micro like actions or micro impact?
You know, many years ago, I used to spend a bit of time in Bangladesh, and I remember I was walking along a road and I saw two guys chipping away at bricks. And you kind of, yes, the classic. I said to one of them, "What are you doing?" He said, "Well, I'm just cleaning these bricks and I'm going to put it together with this guy." I said, "The other guy, what are you doing?" He said, "Oh, I'm building a hospital." I mean, small actions in the context of what you're trying to achieve. And I think that's actually, I think I've heard that from other people as well, almost exactly the same story, but that was a true story. That just depends on your perspective. I mean, what you do matters. What you do can matter, but it depends on your mindset about it. That's how I see it.
So we need to start wrapping up this conversation in a moment. But what I would like to do is here, I'd like to invite the participants of this event to actually add to the impact of this session. So over the years, the B1G1 initiative have created more than 383 million impacts. But today, by being here, you can also add to the impact by scanning the QR code and then let us know which impact you want us to create to honor John's participation in this event. And if you are, at the same time interested in becoming part of the movement to drive business for force for good, or you are causes to join the movement, or as an individual, you want to support this important movement, then you can let us know as well. So before we end this call, so we covered various things about what ICC's law allows you to do. But as a person and a leader, and perhaps a father and a family member, do you have one piece of insight or idea to leave us with?
Well, I mean, I've kind of said it, and I mean, I'm privileged to mentor a lot of people. And one of the first things I say to them, you are an active participant in your own career. Stop waiting for others to actually create space for you. You actually sometimes just have to take control of it yourself. And I genuinely believe that. I mean, take control. Don't be passive, be active. Do not allow inertia to override, I think, the opportunities that are before you. I hope that doesn't sound too rhetorical or too ambitious for people, but it's true. I mean, take control.
Amazing, amazing. And I'm so glad that when Paul Foreman said, John, please do this role, you actually took the opportunity to do so. And I'm actually seeing Paul perhaps next month in Kenya. And
Oh,
yeah, so I will be thanking him for the precise introduction he made 5 years ago. And that led to this conversation, but also the impact we created together through the
it's been
conference.
great talking to you, and it's good to see so many people online. And I really like what you do. It's a pleasure to participate in this conversation today. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And we are so looking forward to continuing our dialogue
Yeah,
with your team and moving forward to create more impact. So thank you so
fantastic.
much, John. And
Yeah, that's
everybody,
me.
thank you so much.
Goodbye,
And see you
everyone.
next time.
Bye.